For the American soldiers who landed on Iwo Jima, they knew that the Japanese forces that they were going to be fighting would not go down without a fight. For the Japanese, death was inevitable, and wave after wave of banzai charges were launched, and some of the most savage fighting of the Second World War took place on the island. At the end of the battle, thousands of American and Japanese soldiers lie dead, with estimates placing around 7,000 Americans and around 18,000 Japanese killed. But there were rumours inside of the American ranks about the notorious nature of the awful enemy, and they heard about one execution of a US Marine which was completely barbaric. Ralph Ignatowski in March 1945 was found dead, but what happened to his remains allegedly were completely shocking. He had been tortured to death by the Japanese, and he was incredibly mutilated. In this video we look at the execution of the American soldier tortured to death by the Japanese on Iwo Jima. To support our channel, please click subscribe. The Battle of Iwo Jima was a major part of the conflict of the Second World War in the Pacific. The Americans mounted an amphibious invasion on the island, and it was a very costly victory for them. The island is located around 750 miles from Tokyo, and it was very heavily defended with tunnels and blockhouses dug for the Japanese to fight from. Many of the soldiers were kept in caves and tunnels, and the Marines were forced to kill Japanese troops virtually to the last man, with few prisoners being taken. Ralph Ignatowski was born in 1926 and actually failed his physical examination when he tried to become a member of the Marine Corps in 1943 during World War II. Let's remember that at this time he was around 16 years old, but he then got through his physical and got around it by using his friend's urine sample to pass. He attended boot camp training in 1944 and was assigned to the 28th Marine Regiment, 5th Marine Division. At this time he actually became close with one of the most famous Marines of World War II, John "Doc" Bradley, who for some time had been thought to have been one of the 6 people who raised the US flag on top of Mount Suribachi in raising the flag on Iwo Jima, the iconic picture. Bradley later became a hero to many back home, as it was claimed that he was in this photo, but he had actually been involved in securing the flagpole. Anyway, Private Ignatowski was on board the USS Missoula in February 1945, and he was destined for the Pacific. Marine troops were being deployed en masse in the Pacific, and he got off his ship in Saipan. Days later he sailed to Iwo Jima along with thousands of Marines, and landed there on February the 19th, 1945. Within weeks he would be dead. He did get sent straight to the front lines of the fighting, and in one incident was wounded a day after arriving as he was struck with shrapnel which came off from an artillery shell, injuring his face and jaw. But he was patched up and sent back to the front lines. The fighting on Iwo Jima was intense, and one former Marine wrote that, within a minute a mortar shell exploded among the group. His left foot and ankle hung from his leg, held on by a ribbon of flesh. Within minutes a second round landed near him, and fragments tore into his other leg. For nearly an hour he wondered where the next shell would land. He was soon to find out as the shell burst almost on top of him, wounding him for a 3rd time in the shoulder. Almost at once another explosion bounced him several feet into the air, and hot shards ripped into both thighs. As he lifted his arm to look at his watch, a mortar shell exploded only feet away and blasted the watch from his wrist and tore a large jagged hole in his forearm. "I was beginning to know what it would have been like to be crucified," he was later to say. By the evening of the 19th of February 1945, 30,000 Marines landed on the island, and there was heavy fighting for days after. At night the Japanese left their defences to carry out sneak attacks on American foxholes in the dark. Others pretended to be wounded Marines to attract and lure US soldiers to their deaths. The Americans turned to flamethrowers to flush Japanese soldiers out of their tunnels. On the 4th of March 1945, Ralph Ignatowski was captured and was taken into a cave by Japanese soldiers. 2 hours later, the body of a dead US Second Lieutenant Leonard Sokol was taken away too. 3 days later, the Americans found both of these bodies, and what was discovered was harrowing. A regimental record claims that, March 7th, 1900, body of captured PFC from E Company, Ignatowski, had apparently been searched, pack emptied and tortured, arm broken, body beaten. Lieutenant Sokol's body nearby mutilated by one of our flamethrowers. The exact circumstances of Private Ignatowski's death is unclear, but it was certain that he suffered a terrifying and truly barbaric end and was tortured to death. It has been claimed in different books what happened. One stated that, on March the 3rd, Private Ralph Ignatowski was somehow dragged into a cave within a small canyon. What I tell you next is what I heard but did not see. Lieutenant Sokol may have tried to rescue Ignatowski, but I don't know for sure. I walked into the canyon and found Lieutenant Sokol on the road, Ralph Ignatowski close behind. An officer approached me and said, "Don't touch them. We may have an atrocity here." I understood Ralph had been bayoneted numerous times. Some punctures bled, some did not. In the book Flags of Our Fathers, the execution and death of Ralph Ignatowski is also mentioned. This claims that, "I have tried so hard to block this out, to forget it. We could choose a buddy to go in with. My buddy was a guy from Milwaukee. We were pinned down in one area. Someone elsewhere fell injured and I ran to help out. And when I came back, my buddy was gone. I couldn't figure out where he was. I could see all around, but he wasn't there. And nobody knew where he was. A few days later, someone yelled that they had found him. They called me over because I was a corpsman. The Japanese had pulled him underground and tortured him. His fingernails, his tongue. It was terrible. I've tried hard to forget all of this." Langley told me it looked as though Ralph Ignatowski had endured just about every variety of physical cruelty imaginable. Both his arms were fractured, Langley said. They hung him there like arms on a broken doll. He had been bayoneted repeatedly. The back of his head had been smashed in. There were other claims and reports from eyewitnesses who saw the aftermath that the poor soldier had been tortured within the cave for 3 days, and that his ears had been cut off, his eyes had been cut out, and most of his teeth were smashed, and that he had suffered significant trauma to his skull. There were also reports that he had several bayonet wounds to his stomach, and that he'd been emasculated also. The body was recovered, and the American forces tried to collect information as to what specifically had happened. The remains of Ignatowski were collected and were buried within a marine cemetery established on Iwo Jima, and he was buried with full military honours, befitting a man who had suffered so much. But then in 1949, his body was exhumed and repatriated back to America, and he is buried still today in Rock Island National Cemetery. The story of the final moments of the life of Ralph Ignatowski is a harrowing one, and it shows the brutality of the Japanese defenders on Iwo Jima as they fought the Marines. Stories like this spread like wildfire amongst the American ranks, and this led to a mentality where prisoners would not be taken. There is some debate as to his final moments, and whether he had been posthumously mutilated, but the reality is that Ralph Ignatowski suffered greatly regardless, and whether he was alive or dead at the time that he was dragged into the cave, the terror what greeted him or his remains was disgusting. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.